All right, so this is page 1. Conversion to Judaism, Halacha Hashkafa, and Historic Challenge by Marc D.Angel. The Jewish community underwent cataclysmic changes during the course of the 19th century. While most of world Jewry was religiously observant in 1800, a large majority were no longer devoted to the halakhic tradition by 1900. 19th century Orthodox rabbinic leadership had to cope with the rise of Reform Judaism, the spread of Haskalah, the breakdown of communal authority over its members, the defection of Jews from Torah and mitzvot and from Judaism altogether. The dramatic erosion in religious observance led to various responses among 19th century Orthodox rabbis. Rabbi Moses Sofer, known as the Hatam Sofer, was recognized as the most authoritative Orthodox voice who shaped traditionalist opposition to Reform Judaism, and indeed to all those who challenged the hegemony of Halacha. He believed that deviators forfeited their right to be considered as proper Jews. He wrote, "If we had the power over them, my opinion would be to separate them from us. We should not give our daughters to their sons, and their daughters should not be accepted for our sons, so as not to be drawn after them. Their sect should be like those of Zadok, Saul, they amongst themselves, and we amongst ourselves." Now, he didn't invent this position. This is a theme all throughout the Talmud. You have a chaver, which is a religious associate, and then you have an am ha'eretz. This is someone who's born in the land, but they're not religiously observant. But they're Jewish. They have a Jewish mother. So a chaver would not go into the house of an am ha'eretz. It wouldn't be kosher. A chaver would not allow an am ha'eretz into the house of the chaver because they would not be dressed like a chaver. So there was a separation there already. And in fact, if a am ha'eretz wanted to become a chaver, it was almost like a conversion. They had to take an oath in front of 3 people, and they would have to vow that they were going to start keeping the laws, which of course they would have to learn. So it was almost like a conversion for somebody who was already Jewish. So this is sort of the position that he's taking. So the Hatam Sofer argued forcefully for maintaining the sanctity of every law and tradition. He is famed for saying Hadash Asur min HaTorah, by which he meant that the Torah forbids innovations, i.e. reforms. His Hashkafa, religious worldview, identified Jewishness with scrupulous observance of Torah and mitzvot and acceptance of the halakhic way of life. So today, we consider a person Jewish if their mother is Jewish, but when this was decided, there was other opinions. There was one opinion that it should travel through the father, although the person who gave that opinion, his teacher spoke out against that and said, how could he come to such a conclusion? But there was another opinion given by Rabbi Akiva. Now, he had smicha going all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. And his opinion was that it should require a Jewish mother and a Jewish father and religious observance. So even with 2 Jewish parents, this was not considered enough in Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Religious observance was part of the deal. So this is the position that he's taking here. So although the Hatam Sofer's position was dominant, other Orthodox voices called for a more tolerant attitude towards those who veered away from the halakhic way of life. Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman, the leading figure in one of Berlin's Orthodox communities, favored a cooperative separatism, i.e., the Orthodox needed to maintain their distinctiveness, but also had to find ways of cooperating with the non-Orthodox. In an earlier generation, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger had sought to ameliorate the halakhic status of the non-observant Jew through the classification of Tinoch Shenishba, comparing the non-observant Jew to a Jewish child who had been captured and raised by non-Jews, and who therefore could not be held responsible for ignorance of Jewish laws and customs. Thus, while the non-Orthodox masses certainly fell short of Jewish religious requirements, they should not be rejected out of hand. They simply did not know any better. This halakhic argument fostered a more sympathetic approach than that taken by Orthodox isolationists. And there's a valid point to this argument too. So just because somebody misses the mark, they're not the most frum person in the world, we shouldn't give up on them. But what's not articulated here is that this position should be applied to everyone, whether you're born into Judaism or whether you're a convert. As we saw from the previous position, that if you're not religiously observant, that position was, it didn't matter if you were a convert or if you were born Jewish. If you were not keeping the laws, you should not be considered Jewish. And I think the reason for that is because if you're not observant and you're out there engaging in bad behavior, then you pretty much forfeit the right to speak for Judaism. Because the population is going to see bad behavior and say, well, this is how Jews behave. And then they run into religious Jews who do not behave this way, and they don't know how to tell the difference. So the strict position was the non-religious Jews should not be able to speak for us religious Jews. And this would avoid us being blamed for things that they're doing when they shouldn't be representing us. So this was applied to born Jews and to converts. The lenient, more tolerant position is that ideally we would be religious, but if they don't know better, we can't hold them accountable, of course. But once they know, the demand should be that they should start observing these things. Now you can make the argument, well, the convert chose this life, so the convert should know better. And there's some validity to that. But we're going to see as we go forward in this some examples of this coming up. So, like all arguments, there's valid points on both sides. But I think whichever side you're going to take has to apply to everyone. You can't just be strict on one person because he's a convert and lenient on the other because his mother was Jewish. We all have to be treated the same. You can't mistreat a convert just because you prefer to have born Jews. So both the hardline and the more tolerant Orthodox rabbis were pious and learned Torah scholars. Both groups sought support for their views in the Talmud and halakhic literature. Why did they come to different conclusions? Their differences did not stem, I believe, from different interpretations of halakhic texts. Rather, their halakhic stances reflected different hashkafot, religious worldviews, and different evaluations of how to address the challenges that faced them. The Hatam Sofer viewed Torah-observant Jews as the real Jews, and the non-observant Jews as betrayers of Judaism who had to be delegitimized. For true Judaism to flourish, it was necessary for Orthodoxy to separate itself to the extent possible from the non-Orthodox. That was his position. The spokesman for a more conciliatory Orthodoxy focused on the principle that all Jews, religiously observant or not, are part of the Jewish people and need to see themselves as members of one peoplehood. Thus, ways had to be found to bridge the gaps between the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox. So this completes page 1, and we'll move on to page 2 now.